You take him before you bake him? No. Jesus. Jamaica cake? No, I bought one.
Oh, God. Why did I agree to this? Right.
Because you gotta faze me.
So,
Faze me.
it's too much. Hello and welcome back to War Mysteries. I'm joined ever presently by Matt.
Hello.
And I am Jay. This week... completely and utterly out of practice. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a disappearance that occurred in 1943. Okay, I've not briefed Matt on anything for this series so far, so he doesn't know what this episode is really about, other than that there's some war stuff related to it. I've got to try and do this thing now. So on April the 4th of 1943, a flight of 25 B-24 Liberators took off from an airbase in Libya. Their mission was to attack the harbour at Naples. After the unsuccessful attack, one of the bombers failed to return to the airbase. None of the air crews that were present saw the plane go down, but it was presumed missing in action over the Mediterranean Sea. Years later, the plane would be found by a British petroleum expedition in the desert that discovered the wreckage of a B-24 in the Calancio Sea. Over the next 3 years, the story of 8 crewmen who had evidently parachuted from the doomed aircraft would unfold, their bodies gradually discovered over subsequent years. However, there were 9 men aboard the plane. This is the story of the Lady Be Good. I've had to sort of size down again because it was bursting, so I've had to sort of remove all 3 series and stuff. So the star of this particular mystery is a B-24 Liberator bomber.
Cool plane.
Yeah,
We haven't got a model of one.
we haven't. It's massive, and I've not had time to build one. Anyway, so a B-24 Liberator, that'd be one of those.
Despite situation with the economy in this country, you've stepped up again. Almost photograph quality.
Well, it is photograph quality. It's photo paper. Naturally, I'll put the picture over my face. It's probably already been done.
So this.
So that is
the plane.
That's not the actual plane we're talking about, but it is in the same squadron. A flight of the 514th Bomber Group.
Of which there were 25, did you say?
Yes, we'll get into what happened from when they all took off and so on and so forth. But specifically, the aircraft we're talking about, the Lady Be Good, had a crew of 9 men. That's the 9 of them. It's the only photo of all the crew together that I can find.
These are the boys. All the boys this time.
All the boys. They're all present, all correct, all accounted for in that picture.
And will we be interviewing any of these in this episode?
No, because apart from the fact that if they were still alive, there'd be about 120. They
perished.
Yes.
All right.
So the B-24 was part of a group of bombers which were taking off from Saluk Field, which is in the very northern tip of Libya, to fly north across the Mediterranean Sea to bomb Naples, which is obviously in the southern part of Italy.
All right.
So, best thing to do, obviously. You know the drill by now. Let's have a look at it. Like many other American-manufactured military aircraft of the early war period, the consolidated B-24 Liberator first entered service with British forces, seeing use as early as March of 1941 with RAF Coastal Command. It would not be until 1942 that they would be used in anger, when they were pressed into active bombing roles with both the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Force. In mid-March of 1943, Lady Be Good was a newly delivered and fresh off the line D-Series Liberator, the first types to enter frontline service, stationed at Saluk Field in Libya, and attached to the 514th Bomb Squadron, part of the 376th Bomb Group Heavy. This aircraft carried serial number 4124301. The aircrew assigned to Lady Be Good were also new, and had only arrived on station in Libya on March 18th, just 1 week prior. The crew consisted of the following members. First Lieutenant William J. Hatton, the pilot, of Whitestone, New York. Second Lieutenant Robert F. Toner, the co-pilot, of North Attleboro, Massachusetts. Second Lieutenant D.P. Hayes, the navigator, of Lee's Summit, Missouri. Second Lieutenant John S. Varovka, the bombardier, of Cleveland, Ohio. Technical Sergeant Harold J. Ripslinger, the flight engineer, of Saginaw, Michigan. Technical Sergeant Robert E. Lamotte, the radio operator, of Lake Linden, Michigan. Staff Sergeant Guy E. Shelley, the gunner, of New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Vernon L. Moore, a gunner of New Boston, Ohio. And Staff Sergeant Samuel E. Adams, also a gunner of Eureka, Illinois.
So they're brand new to the plane. The crew were assigned to Lady Be Good and had been on station only a week earlier. So they had to wait a week for their bomber to arrive. It's been delivered fresh from the factory.
Brand new.
Brand new. I've never seen combat. Landed down in Saluk Field in Libya, and they would essentially get to know their plane and then off they'd go. They were on their first mission together, fresh from America, and Lady Be Good would be joining 24 other Liberators on their first raid, which would be against the Axis-held port in Naples. That would take place on the afternoon of April 4th. It's a two-stage attack that would see 2 waves of bombers, of which they were in the second half, so 12 and then 13, that would fly over the Med, bomb Naples, come back.
At night or in the day?
Yeah, in the evening. So they would take, it's about a 700-mile trip.
Have you done it?
I've not done it. I've not been back in time.
No, I mean, did you not think to go and take trains and planes and experience what it's like to actually travel?
No. I've not
You
done
do
that.
less research for these things than I think you do.
Expectations need to lower a bit.
Yeah, I came back from Japan.
Naples was a hot target. In 1943 alone, there were over 180 air raids here, and it was the second most bombed city in Italy during World War II. Only Milan suffered more aerial bombardment. Beginning on January 11th, the city was bombed every single day until the end of May, with bombers even descending to a much lower altitude in order to strafe the city with machine gun fire on the way back to their respective air bases. On the day of the raid, a sandstorm savaged the airbase at around 2:15 p.m, while Lady Be Good took off as one of the last bombers to leave Saluk Field. The poor visibility soon caused 8 of the bombers in the first wave to turn back, and losing sight of the rest of their own squadron, Lady Be Good had little choice but to proceed to the target alone, a journey of almost 700 miles across the Mediterranean Sea. The raid did not go to plan. Arriving over the target at around 7:50 p.m, and at an altitude of 24,900 feet, poor visibility continued to plague them, and the city was almost entirely obscured from their view. Standard procedure for long-range missions such as this called for jettison of their payload into the sea in order to save fuel for the return journey, which Lady Be Good did. Setting a course back south, they headed for Saluk Field. Lady Be Good would not make it back.
And that is pretty much where the reports end. Listed as MIA, 9 men gone. Didn't return to Saluk Field. So that's pretty much what happened. The bombing raid didn't go to plan. I think 2 or 3 of the bombers managed to hit the harbour
A boat was destroyed, but it wasn't a military boat. It was like a
Just some poor sod's
just,
yacht.
just some poor bloke's fishing yacht or whatever. Yeah, collateral damage. But other than that, no real damage. Not ineffective. But they were bombing it every day, so it didn't really matter. Anyway, so now we move on to where the plane was actually discovered, which was 16 years later. Years later, on November 9th of 1958, a team of British geologists prospecting on behalf of BP were flying across the Libyan desert. At a point approximately 400 miles south of Saluk Field, a group had spotted a harsh shadow below, an unusual object resting on the sand, in an area known as the Calancio Dune Sea. This was recognised as aircraft wreckage, though not formally identified from the air, and was subsequently reported. In May of 1959, a ground survey team visited this site, discovering the preserved remains of Lady Be Good. The tailplane had snapped off, but it was otherwise relatively intact. The first concern was to identify what had happened to the occupants, and the site provided a few clues as to their fate. The parachutes were not on board. There were no signs that the men had been with the plane when it crashed. Water canteens were still full. A coffee canteen and some supplies of food were present. Personal possessions of the crew were found, including the navigator's logbook. The radio, one of the engines, and even the .50 caliber machine guns were all found to be operable. Examining the external control surfaces, it was noted that the aircraft had been trimmed and configured to fly straight and level. Subsequent investigations began when the US military got involved. This would later be expanded under Operation Climax. This initial search yielded a number of artefacts from the plane, discovered strewn across the desert, with some arranged as if to indicate a direction of travel.
So what, this was in the late
1958,
Yeah,
sort of November time, end of 1958. They're flying across the desert and they spot this wreck. They don't know what it is, but it's big enough that they don't quite know why it's there. Right, back on it. Pretty obvious now when we know what a B-24 looks like, but that's what they saw from the air, which is what they photographed, and they sent it to Willis Air Base. 6 months later, they sent a ground team out and they surveyed it and they discovered the pretty well preserved remains of Lady Be Good.
too much caramel in these things.
Caramel? What do you mean? What is it? Boost. This time of night. The first concern was to identify what happened, obviously, to the occupants. So the gun still fired, the radio still worked, and they even managed to start one of the engines. The other three were trashed, one come off. Examining the external control surfaces, they found that the plane had been trimmed to fly straight and level. This is normally what you do if you're going to bail out.
Oh, if you were going to jump out, you mean?
Yeah. It appeared that the crew had bailed out long before the aircraft had come to rest in the desert, and as a result, a search operation was undertaken. In February of 1960, the US Army conducted a formal search for the plane, and 5 sets of remains were quickly discovered on the 11th of the month. These included Hatton, Toner, Hayes, Lamotte, and Adams. Various other items were found strewn across the sand dunes, which indicated that at least 3 remaining survivors had ventured northward, one of which was a diary. Now the navigator is supposed to keep a logbook of where the plane goes, what they do, just shorthand. So when they found the plane, and they found the logbook in the plane, like I mentioned earlier on, with all the water canteens and that actually ended at Naples. But it looks like the plane flew south in the sandstorm, in the dark. Couldn't see. And when they were about to run out of fuel, they jumped out of the plane thinking they were still over the Mediterranean. So they expected to land in the ocean.
and they in fact landed
In the desert.
in the desert 400 miles south of the airbase.
That does change the way you consider landing, doesn't it? If you're going to land in water or sand.
If you're sort of bracing yourself
that was
for
a bit of a shock.
water,
So they got lost in the desert.
basically. From what they could tell from the wreckage, it looks like the crew had bailed out quite a long time before the aircraft had come down into the desert on its own, about 15 miles north or thereabouts. So that's where they started to search from, up north, because that's where they found the bulk of the gear. They found spent casings, burnt out flares. So they think that when they landed, they started shooting off their guns because it was night time. They started shooting their guns off and the flare guns to group up. Clever idea.
Sense, yeah.
In February of 1960, the US Army conducted Operation Climax. On the 11th of February, just about 7 or 8 days after they began, 5 sets of remains were discovered to the north of the plane. Items that were strewn around indicated that at least 3 survivors had ventured north from that point, and one of those included a diary, which is what we're going to look at next. Discovered with the remains of 2nd Lieutenant Toner was his small diary, which documented the last days of the crew. These are the entries that it contained.
Sunday, April 4th, 1943. Naples. 28 planes. Things pretty well mixed up. Got lost returning, out of gas, jumped. Landed in desert at 2 in the morning. No one badly hurt. Can't find John. All of us present. Monday 5th. Started walking northwest. Still no John. Few rations, half canteen of water, 1 capful per day. Sun fairly warm. Good breeze from northwest. Night very cold. No sleep. Rested and walked. Tuesday 6th. Rested at 11:30. Sun very warm. No breeze. Spent PM in hell. No planes, etc. Rested till 5 PM. Walked and rested till night. 15 minutes on, 5 off. Wednesday, April 7th. Same routine. Everyone getting weak. Can't get very far. Prayers all the time. Again, PM very warm. Hell. Can't sleep. Everyone sore from ground. Thursday 8th. Hit sand dunes. Very miserable. Good wind, but continuous blowing of sand. Everybody now very weak. Thought Sam and Moore were all gone. Lamont eyes gone. Everyone else's eyes bad. Still going northwest. Friday night. Shelley, Rib, Moore separate. Trying to get help. Rest of us all very weak. Eyes bad. Not any travel. All want to dive. Still very little water. Nights are about 35. Good northerly wind. No shelter. 1 parachute left. Saturday 10th. Still having prayer meetings for help. No sign of anything. Couple of birds. Good wind from north. Really weak now. Can't walk. Pains all over. Still all want to die. Nights very cold. No sleep. Sunday 11th. Still waiting for help. Still praying. Eyes bad. Lost all our way. Aching all over. Could make it if we had water. Just enough left to put our tongue to. Have hope for help very soon. No rest. Still same place. Monday 12th. No help yet. Very cold night.
The discovery of 5 crewmen triggered Operation Climax in May of 1960. A C-130 and 2 US Army Bell H-13 helicopters scoured the Dune Sea for signs of the remaining men. But it was in fact a BP expedition that located the next set of remains, those of Staff Sergeant Shelley, on May 12, 1960.
He was found 24 miles northwest of the site of the original 5 crewmen, and over 170 miles from the aircraft wreckage. One of the search helicopters, coasting across the dunes on May 17th, made a brief landing upon spotting an unusual shape in the sand, which would turn out to be the remains of Tech Sergeant Ripslinger, at a location 26 miles further northwest of Sergeant Shelley.
So he made it just over 200 miles from the plane.
Oh, I see. So he would have carried on from there. They're obviously moving as a group, and then. Yeah.
That second discovery concluded Operation Climax. In August of 1960, another BP expedition, a keen for oil out there clearly, discovered John Warovka, the one that was missing in the diary. He was found quite a way off the general path that they took and much closer to the plane. Evidence suggests that his parachute didn't open and he died as a result of the fall. So in many ways he was spared what the rest of them went through.
This accounted for 8 of the crewmen, but one remained, Staff Sergeant Vernon Lewis Moore. Though the teams kept searching for as long as possible, equipment and machinery began to break down as a result of sand infiltration, and the search had to be called off. Ultimately, the remains of Sergeant Moore were never officially found.
Is that the mystery?
That's the crux of it. Yeah, so no one actually knows what happened to him. A British Army patrol was crossing Libya in 1953, I think it was. I've tried endlessly to find records of it, but I've not been able to.
Did you go to Libya?
I didn't go to Libya. Who the hell wants to go to Libya?
Libyans.
Gaddafi did, didn't he? He lived it over there. When they were crossing the desert, they found the remains of somebody about 80 miles or so south of Saluk Field. Didn't identify them, but the remains were kept, and when they were examined in 2001, they may have been more. And if that was the case, then he made it further than any of them. Just 80 miles south of the airbase, which is over 320 miles of travel. So a long, long way to go across the desert. But never officially found. There's not really any theories. There's only really one way it could have ended for him.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately.
All of them.
That's about it. So I've actually tracked on a map. That is where they were found in relation to where they should have been. So that's where their airbase was at Saluk Field. That's where the plane finally landed. That black line through the middle is about 400 miles.
It's a long old way, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is where the guy whose parachute didn't open ended up. The 5 that grouped together ended up about a third of the way. About 90 or 100 miles or so. Maybe a little bit more.
And what you're saying, the guy, the one who's not mentioned, who didn't officially get found, is somewhere closer to here?
Yeah. So following the same pattern. They're about 25 or so miles apart as are they. So he was a bit further up. But then they made it all the way through the Calancio Dune Sea, which is massive, unending expanse of desert.
Well,
no roads.
Fair play to him for that.
So a long way to go. Madness. There is a bit more before we finish up. There's a bit more that I can tell you about what went on.
Please do.
The plane obviously was recovered. Lady be good. It's now stored in an airbase in Libya.
Restored?
No, it's still in pieces. It's now at Tobruk Field Airbase, which is in Libya.
Oh.
The sad thing is, if they had, upon landing in the desert, realised where they were and just headed south to where the plane was, which was 15 miles away in the end, they would have had access to all their water, food, a working radio, and the chances of their survival would have been massively increased.
That's a good point.
There was an oasis just over the distance that Shelley managed to get to the south, which also might have helped. It was very sparsely populated, but there were a few people there. But obviously in 1940s Egypt/Libya, it's just a desert. Naturally, once the plane was found, souvenir hunters get involved. People start stripping it for parts. And a bit like James Dean's Porsche, was it Little Bastard that was called? They used some of the parts from Lady Be Good because they were still operational in other planes, which then suffered calamities. After some parts were salvaged and technically evaluated, they were reused in other planes belonging to the American military. Some of these planes received spare parts and then developed unexpected problems. So a C-54, which is an aerial transport plane, had several of the auto-sign transmitters that came out of Lady Be Good's their radio transmission equipment. Had to throw cargo overboard in order to land safely because it experienced propeller difficulties. I mean, they're not related,
Over the desert, was that?
No, just in its regular duties. But obviously someone went, those transmitters in the back there that have got nothing to do with the engines come out of Lady Be Good. US Army, De Havilland, Canada, DHC-3 Otter, Sea Otter, with an armrest from the bomber, ended up crashing in the Gulf of Sidra.
An armrest?
Yeah, an armrest. Only a few traces of the plane ever washed ashore a few years later.
Including the armrest?
Including the armrest, yeah.
Obviously.
Obviously. Because why wouldn't it have been? There's a memorial at Wheelus Air Force Base. And I think it's the Strawberry Bitch, which was another B-24. Same region. I don't think it was part of the same bomb group, but it was operating in the same region. We actually saw that at Dayton.
Did we?
Yeah. There's also some parts of the plane are there as well. We would have seen them in the cabinet. So head to Dayton if you want to see some more bits.
Miles away.
Long way off. Oh, and someone made a stained glass window as well.
What?
Memorial, isn't it?
What are bits of it?
No, just a stained glass window. It's quite nice.
So now we start to look at the legacy.
The B-24 Liberator to this day holds the distinction of being the most produced US military aircraft in history, with over 18,000 being manufactured by the end of the war. At peak production, one aircraft was completed every 100 minutes, and there came a point where supply of the aircraft began to exceed the ability to field them. This led to more than 400 planes being flown straight from the factory to scrapping facilities, without ever having seen combat service. Lady Be Good and her crew were not so lucky. Their ill-fated mission was just one small part of an enormous bombing campaign against Italy during early 1943, and the losses suffered by the bomb groups were very high. The Liberator D was a product of wartime design and manufacturing, built for quantity over quality. Compared to the B-17, which was designed and produced before the war, and therefore with time to refine the aircraft, the B-24D flew lower, were less mechanically reliable, held weaker defensive armament, and did not feature self-sealing fuel tanks until later in the war, making them a far more attractive target to interceptors. For the crew of Lady Be Good, however, none of these deficiencies would play a role in their fate. A combination of bad luck, primitive direction-finding equipment, inexperience, and wishful thinking brought about their inescapable situation. But given the circumstances in which they found themselves, these are the only options that would have made sense to them. If the crew had headed south to the plane wreckage once they realised they had in fact landed in the desert, they would have had access to their supplies and even the radio, significantly increasing the odds of their survival. Their vast journey across the sand, though ultimately futile, is nonetheless an incredible example of human endurance in the face of overwhelming adversity. Many decades later, however, we are left only with puzzles. How did the crew miss the signal flares fired from Saluk Field? Why didn't they send a distress signal before abandoning the plane? And why did they wait so late? What became of Staff Sergeant Moore? These are questions that, sadly, may never be answered.
Will all of these pictures make it into the episode?
Mm-hmm.
Even that one of me?
So, yeah, a slightly more linear mystery this time round. Obviously, we don't know what happened to Vernon Moore, Staff Sergeant Moore.
No, we don't.
But it's pretty safe to assume that he's resting in the sands. He's never been recovered, which is very sad, but there is a memorial for him back in the US. That's it. Unfortunately, that is the end of their story. All that remains now is a memorial, the remains of the plane, which are still in Libya, and that armrest.
Could do with that
Yeah,
one
that's
too, actually.
Could do. Yeah.
Not that one.
No, maybe not.
Good story.
It's a singular example, but there are many stories like it.
Not much of a mystery.
Not a grand mystery, but quite sad.
Very sad.
Um,
but like you say, a good story of human endurance, even though they didn't make it in the end.
What would you have done?
Or what would I have done? I'd like to think I would have thought, as you said there, to travel back in the direction of the plane.
But because I think they assumed that because they were bailing out over the sea, or they thought they were bailing out over the sea, they probably wouldn't have thought to do that.
There's situations where the situation they were in is obviously, it's not ideal. So I'd have probably done what they all did and died.
I suppose you don't really know how you're going to react when you're in a situation like that. I would like to think that perhaps I'd be able to focus on what's going on and think, well, all of our stuff's on the plane. Let's see if we can find that. But they thought they were a couple of miles walk from the airbase. Obviously they weren't. Yeah, they were a long way down. Practically in the middle of the Sahara. So any direction they would have headed.
Not ideal.
No.
Not ideal.
They were a long way from home.
Well, they did well to get to where they got.
So that's it. That's the Lady Be Good.
It's good to be back, actually. It's been a while since I've sat here and been bored for the best part of an hour. I mean, you I don't know how long the episode will be this time around. Sometimes
Massive.
the episodes go on forever. And you can rest assured I've been sat here for 3 times that long because loads of it gets cut out. But other than that, it's good to be back.
So thank you once again for joining us, and for those of you that have returned, we're very grateful for you to still stick around. It's been a bit tricky this year. There's been a lot of things that have been going on behind the scenes here. Not literally, of course. Still at the same wall back here. Some more episodes on the way. Keep an eye on the channel. Again, our timelines are always a bit shaky as we essentially put these together as and when we can. I know that our Instagram has been a bit quiet over the last year. Let us know what you think down in the old comments pit. It's a bit dusty down there.
Shame we couldn't get a B-24 on the table.
We do normally have a model plane.
We do. I mean, obviously the grenades back was very against the idea, but it's I suppose that's intellectual property now, really, isn't it? Any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. But until next time, we will see you through the screen, I guess. Be a while for them, obviously.
Panda Pops
Panda
in
Pops.
a glass.
It's the same. Honestly, it never ends. Even when this is off, I have to deal with
There's
this.
going to be a lot to cut up.
There's gonna be
isn't
an
there?
awful lot to cut
with
up.
this, because that's obviously not going in it.
Lots of audio spikes. Yeah, there's going to be an awful lot of post editing. Yeah. Is it right when we've shit? Yeah, on that note, I think I might get out of it. So
Hang on.
we're yeah. Oh, it's gone. That has gone everywhere.
Yellow banana face.